सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रीभगवानुवाच अशोच्यानन्वशोचस्त्वं प्रज्ञावादांश्च भाषसे गतासूनगतासूंश्च नानुशोचन्ति पंडिताः। Panditaha nanushochanti, the wise do not grieve. Gatasun agatasumscha, for those who are living or for those who are no longer living. That includes everybody. Those who are departed and those who are here includes everybody. But although as we said, the verse says they do not grieve. We said that it is not that we grieve or somebody grieves, that grief takes over a person. If we had freedom to grieve, then we would have freedom not to grieve also. If you could will to grieve, you could will not to grieve also. In that case, nobody would grieve. If you could will not to be sorrowful, nobody would be sorrowful. If you could will to be happy, everybody will be happy. Even happiness also does not come by will, or unhappiness also does not come by will. They happen. They happen when something happens within ourselves, that happiness and unhappiness happen. It's basically, as we said, our perception and our conclusion of what we perceive and we conclude. So when I conclude that something is favorable, if that is my conclusion about a given situation or a given person, then automatically a response of happiness arises from me. The moment my conclusion is this is favorable, this is desirable, I like this. When this is what my mind says, automatically happiness happens. On the other hand, when I say this is unfavorable, undesirable, I do not like it, then my mind automatically responds with unhappiness. So happiness and unhappiness both are responses as a result of my conclusion. And it is the nature of our intellect to conclude. That's called intellect, whose job it is to conclude, to judge. So intellect is a faculty that judges. And we constantly judge or conclude every moment about whatever it is that we confront. It is the nature of intellect to judge and conclude about whatever it is that it confronts. We cannot be without a judgment. Even though they told us, don't be judgmental. But we cannot but judge and conclude every moment about whatever it is that we confront. Because then alone we can interact. Meaning that how I should interact with you will be determined by what I have concluded about you. If my conclusion is that you are a good person, my friend, then my response is one kind. If my conclusion is that you are not a good person, then my response will be different. So the way I respond is determined by my conclusions, by my perception of how I perceive you, how I conclude. So this is how we normally perceive situations. Favorable, unfavorable, desirable, undesirable. This is how our conclusions are. And therefore, happiness or sorrow automatically happen on account of those conclusions, those branding you can say. That's why we say that it is the nature of our mind, which in Sanskrit is called manas, which just concludes like that and then respond in a certain way. So conclusion of the wise people is different, therefore the response is different. So understand, grief is a response that arises from us. It is not that we decide to grieve. We decide that this is friend. That's the decision. And then happiness is the response. We decide that this fellow is an enemy. Then unhappiness is a response. So even though the translation says wise do not grieve, because that's what the verse says, but then grief does not happen to wise people. Put it this way. Because grief happens to anybody on account of their perception, and since wise person has a perception, that perception does not warrant any grief or any reaction at all. They do not react to situation. Well, Swami used to use expression action and reaction. Reaction is what happens. Action is what I do deliberately. If you deliberate, then action will happen. Do not deliberate, reaction will happen. So Swami used to talk about two-step response. One-step response is reaction. Two-step response, action. For example, my mind says that, hey, watch out. My mind says something, impulsively, habitually. Then I step back. Wait a minute. Is it right for me to conclude this? Is it right for me to brand this person as so and so? Is it right for me to brand this situation unfavorable or favorable? The mind habitually brands favorable, unfavorable, and then reacts. If I step back and ask the question, why do I say this is favorable? Why do I say this is unfavorable? Then perhaps a deliberation will have a scope there. And it is likely that I may change my conclusion. Or you may not change your conclusion. You may, even after deliberation also, you may conclude that this is unfavorable or favorable. But basically, our response to a situation is deliberate and not impulsive. Habitually, so a lot of our responses are mechanical or impulsive. This is spontaneous, but that's the wrong word. What happens immediately is called spontaneous now. Very often it is impulsive. So wise people are not impulsive. They are not even deliberate, they are spontaneous. That's the difference. Impulsive, deliberate, and spontaneous. An immature person habitually just responds, concludes and responds, an impulsive response, which is determined by our built-in likes and dislikes. So whenever we are controlled by our emotions of likes and dislikes, then we act in an impulsive manner. We don't act, the likes and dislikes act through us. I get angry. I don't act, it is anger that acts through me. So whenever those impulses act through me, meaning that when they take hold of me, when I come under their sway, then they decide how I respond. I do not decide. I may be otherwise a very nice person and giving you very intelligent lectures and everything. What anger is, I may know the anatomy of anger and everything, but then when situation comes, you may find, oh, Swami, you also can get angry? You just heard a half an hour lecture of anger and then, because at that time, I was not deliberate. I was habitual, impulsive. So if our impulses take over us, then we act not as intelligent people, as deliberate people, as impulsive people. So number one is we should be deliberate. Step back, take a step back. Two-step response, you know that one-step response is impulsive, two-step response is deliberate. So take a moment to deliberate. On the conclusion that the mind took that this is favorable, unfavorable, right, wrong, whatever conclusion mind has, just subject it to the scrutiny of intellect. Let your wisdom, let your understanding, let your intellect come into play and either verify or not. So intellect should decide based on its understanding and wisdom whether this judgment on the part of mind that this is right or wrong or favorable, unfavorable, is it justified? Maybe intellect may think with its wisdom that no, it's not justified. It's not justified for me to act in a certain way. Even the person has committed, even if the person's behavior deserves anger on my part, let us say. Even a person's behavior deserves retaliation from my part. But then I deliberate, is it right for me to retaliate? Retaliation is justified, but is it right for me to retaliate? Is it good for me to retaliate? When I retaliate, I may hurt that person, but then I should realize that in that process I am also hurting myself. So even though retaliation is justified emotionally, intellectually is not justified because only compassion is the value, not retaliation. Then that intellect reminds me, compassion. So thus, two-step response means a deliberate response, where it is our intellect has an opportunity to come into play and offer its wisdom or its values and attitudes. The mind may act impulsively, but intellect has its values and attitudes. And then I say that maybe anger is justified, but is it right for me? Is it my value? No, my value is forgiveness. Retaliation is justified. Is it my value? No, compassion is my value. Greed may be justified. Grabbing may be justified. Is it my value? No, grabbing is not my value. Giving is my value. So our values and attitudes have an opportunity to come into play only when we are deliberate, not otherwise. So even though as human beings we do enjoy what we call free will, that free will is not available to us whenever we are controlled by our impulses. Then it's not the will that responds, it is impulse that responds. For the will to respond, we need to be deliberate. So we must cultivate this habit. In every situation we deliberate. Take a step back, deliberate. The deliberate may be only 1 second. It's not that you deliberate for 1 hour or something like that. It depends. It can be 1 hour also. It can be fraction of a second also. So do what is right. By deliberation, I do what I at least know to be right. It may turn out to be wrong, meaning that it is possible that even my intellect may judge in a wrong manner, but then I will realize later, because I know why I acted in a certain manner. If the result is not desirable, then I know that next time I should do it differently. When I act impulsively, there is nothing to learn because of an impulse. When I act deliberately, I can learn from my response. Look, this is not the way to respond. This is not the right way to judge. Judge this way. So we learn. It becomes a process of learning and growing, as our Swamiji would say. And what would that do to us? When we deliberate like this for a long time, slowly it needs less and less effort, and then it becomes what? Spontaneous. That you are spontaneously a good or right person. Impulsively, I am usually the wrong person. Deliberately, I am usually a right person. But by a deliberation for a long time, I spontaneously become the right person. That's called wisdom. Who is a wise person? Who is spontaneously right. Meaning that his mind and intellect are completely in alignment. So he doesn't have to think about what is right and wrong, he is spontaneously right. So whatever Swamiji's, this Swayam Brahmanishtam, Swayam Dharmanishtam, Swayam Ahimsaikanishtam. Nishtha means what? Nishtha means what? Spontaneous. Dharmaikanishta means what? One is spontaneously acts according to dharma. Ahimsaikanishtam meaning one who spontaneously acts in a non-violent way, not deliberately. Doesn't have to deliberate. So deliberation is a sadhana. What is called spiritual practice is deliberation, which culminates into the and which is the spontaneity. So wise people are spontaneous because they have deliberated for a long time as to what is Atma, what is Anatma, what I can change, what I cannot change, what is Ishvara's creation, what is my creation. So there are two creations, Ishvara's creation and our Jiva creation. Ishvara has created this world. Upon that, we have our own creation, our own superimposition. This is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is favorable, unfavorable. All of these are our branding. That's called our creation. It's called creation of individual or subjective creation. This objective creation available for everybody's experience or perception, upon that we superimpose something subjective. Favorable. Now you don't have entry to that. You do not have entry to my subjective creation. All of us have equal entry to objective creation, which is creation of Ishvara. We equally perceive the people. But over and above people, I perceive something more. Friend, brother, sister. Nice. No good. This is my personal perception. You do not know what it is. It is my subjective perception. Meaning that we do not usually respond to what is objective or what is really there. We respond to our subjective, we respond to what we think is there and not what really is there. So this subjective part we have to slowly and slowly we have to remove. When we act impulsively, it is subjective creation. When we act deliberately, then we try to be objective. That my conclusion, this is so and so, is it right? Then I subject to my conclusion to the scrutiny of the intellect. And then come to understand, then respond. So this impulse all arises from what we call the subjective, Jiva Srishti or subjective creation. Impulses arise from that. Because I like, I dislike. This is my creation. Likable, dislikable. Understand that there is no such thing as likable. Had it been so, then everybody would have liked it. There is no such thing as good also, really. Had it been so, everybody would have found it good and bad and right and wrong and likable, dislikable, favorable, unfavorable. There is no such thing as favorable. This is the objective thing called favorable because everybody has seen it as favorable. What everybody sees is objective. So favorable, unfavorable is not objective, it's subjective creation. That's the nature of mind. That's the nature of impulsive faculty, which habitually brands things and then acts. Meaning that we do not respond to what is, we respond to what we think it is. And therefore, to the same thing, different people respond in different ways. Is not so? Same thing. Somebody likes it, somebody hates it. I love banana, I hate banana. That's all. So same thing can become object of quite opposite responses. So we should understand the difference between the subjective and the objective. What is projected by the mind and what it really is. What Ishvara has created. As best as possible, we should be in contact with Ishvara's creation, and we should slowly and slowly come out of the influence of the Jiva's creation or subjective creation or projection of our mind. That's what we have to do. That's a big sadhana, a two-step response, a deliberate response. So thus, this is a practice of seeing the truth. When we are deliberate, we practice seeing things as they are. You follow? That practice leads to perfection, they say. So practice of seeing things as they are will lead to perfection. Of spontaneously seeing things as they are, that's called wisdom. And therefore wise people see everything as right. They don't brand as good, bad, favorable, because it's not. Ishvara's creation is always right. This is what they know for sure. Because this is manifestation of infinite wisdom. Infinite wisdom cannot be wrong. It is right, not only right, but it is in fact a grace. This further. Ishvara is not only infinite wisdom, but Ishvara is embodiment of Krupa or grace. That's a matter of belief. That Ishvara always showers grace is a matter of belief. Many people may not agree, because when you unpleasant experiences in our life, what sort of grace is Swami? I just lost my son. What do you mean grace? Ishvara is very cruel. He's taken my young son from me, and we understand that. Don't tell them that this is all subjective. Don't say that. That of course we have to sympathize, and empathy must be there. But as I say, we don't know. Are we grieving for him or are we grieving for ourselves? We don't grieve for him, because the Ishvara must have some plan for him if he's gone away. Everybody is a spiritual pilgrim. And from one stage you go to the other stage. So maybe that person has done what was needed to be done in this lifespan. His thing is over. Now he continues. So what has happened may be good for the one who has departed. We have no way of knowing that it is not good. No, we are grieving for ourselves, that there is a vacuum in our life. That is understandable, that is true. And all we can do is to just go through that grief prayerfully, that's all we can do. But that is because there is a high attachment there, and there is tremendous dependence. What happens is that in our relationship, it's natural, but what happens is our love slowly and slowly becomes attachment. Meaning that we become more and more attached, more and more dependent for our emotional well-being and comfort upon a given person. And more attached we are, meaning that more dependent emotionally we are for our comfort and well-being, more is the extent of loss. Because what is lost is a source of comfort and emotional well-being that we have lost all of a sudden, and that's a loss. And it's for all human beings. We cannot fault anybody for having attachment, because that's the way of life. There's no life without attachment also. Attachment should be there, otherwise there's no life. But then, if attachment has no boundaries, then sometimes it can go beyond a point where we cannot control it. So we grieve on account of loss of somebody, basically because of personal loss that we experience. And that loss is because we inadvertently became dependent in that relationship. It is natural for all human beings. It is natural that this happens, and therefore that kind of grief we will also accept that it's a shocking event, and therefore grief is very understandable. But we grieve for little things. For death we can grieve, for near and dear is understandable. But here that for just, looked at me in a certain way and I become upset. Somebody laughs at me and I become upset. So I become upset because somebody did not smile at me. I become upset because somebody smiled at me. Because it's my perception. Why are you smiling at me? Oh, he did not smile at me. He did not look at me. The Swamis are also subjected to this. Swamiji, you did not look at me in the class. So I must make sure that my sight goes like that all the time. Then also people complain. But Swamiji was saying, but what can I do? Swamiji said, when I'm looking at you, you're looking down. He says, that was comforting to me. I thought I was the only one subject to that. But I realized that he also had, so no problem, I thought I was the people complained about me, you don't look at me, no. And, you feel guilty. When Swamiji said this, I thought, okay, then I have company. But this is a subjective perception, as to whether we are, somebody likes us, somebody does not like us, is all our perception. Meaning that we become unhappy or sad for insignificant things. Death is a very significant thing, or loss is a significant thing, understandable. There is a loss in business and things like that, understandable. But somebody did not invite me, somebody did not come, all the time the mind keeps complaining and complaining and complaining. Meaning that we seem to have made it a habit to interpret everything to cause grief to us. So then two-step response there. Lord Krishna will say later on, Siddha siddho samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. Here Arjuna, being even-minded in both success and failure, we stand for pairs of opposites. Lord Krishna mentions siddhi and asiddhi, success and failure, but it represents all dvandva or pairs of opposites, meaning honor and dishonor, praise and censure, gain and loss, victory and defeat. All of these are included there. Lord Krishna will teach samo bhutva, being even-minded in the midst of this pairs of opposites, because that is what life is. That is how Ishvara has made this life. That situation is never the same, it is constantly changing. And we are changing like a pendulum, goes from one end to the other. So he stopped talking to me, Somebody who was, was so close to me, all of a sudden stopped talking. So from one end to the other. This is how life is. Lord Krishna says that is what it is. Therefore, you develop an equanimity of the mind. Not insensitivity. Equanimity is in fact seeing something more than what the eyes see. What the eyes see is success and failure. But then equanimity, person who is equanimous sees something more than that. What does he see? He sees in both Ishvara Prasada or grace of Ishvara. Ishvara has done it. Ishvara has given me success, he has given me failure. There must be a valid reason or good reason for that. And therefore, I accept Ishvara's judgment. So more we tune to Ishvara, our Swamiji say, more of Ishvara, less of I. That I, ego means what? Is subjective creation. The individual projection is I. And the object of creation is Ishvara. We have to go beyond that also. But this is the Vyavaharika Satta we are talking about. More of Ishvara, less of I. More of objectivity, less of subjectivity. That's what we do by deliberation. Deliberately bring Ishvara Sushti in that. And recognize what is the Jiva Sushti, meaning what is my projection part that I recognize. And I decide not to be subject to come under the sway of that projection. And wise people see what is right spontaneously, that this is Ishvara. That's what Upanishad says. Sarvam khalvidam brahma. What is Ishvara? Purnameva avashishyate. In the perception of a wise person, all what is Purnam, what is whole and complete. Just as ocean is complete, waves coming and going do not change anyway the wholeness or the boundlessness of ocean. If you see the ocean, then the waves do not bother you. If you just look at the waves and every wave goes up and down, then we also go up and down. If you have the total perception of the whole, which the wise people have. Because what is whole? As we will learn, what is Purnam? What is perfect? It is not only Ishvara's creation, that is one step. Second is, Ishvara is the creation. Meaning that Ishvara himself is manifest as creation. In the beginning was Ishvara's creation. But subsequently what do we say? Ishvara is the creation. What is Ishvara? Not what is done by Ishvara, that is one step. Second step is, what is Ishvara? And Ishvara means Purnam, complete, limitless, whole, no lack, no want. That's how wise people see. So when you see everything is whole, complete, right, there is no question of grief. Grief is when we see something that is wrong, something that is not right, something that should not be. But in their perception, what is Ishvara? What is his whole? What is his Purnam? Therefore, Gatasum, Agatasum se nano shochandi panditaha. Wise people do not grieve, meaning that grief does not overtake them. Grief overtakes a person when we have a certain perception which is born of ignorance. But when we have the perception that is born of knowledge, grief has no scope. So grief is ready to attack me if my perception is wrong. It's the wrong perception that invites grief. It's the right perception that does not give any scope to the grief. So for the wise people, there is no scope for the grief. Not that they do not grieve. They do not grieve means they could grieve also, So the translation is they do not grieve, but in fact, there is no occasion for grief for them. Because grief has no scope in the universe. What is perfect? How can there be grief imperfect? When everything is perfect, everything is right, everything is, there is a question of grief. But that is not yet our perception. When that's called the wisdom, when that is a perception. When what is in order. What is right. Then the grief has no scope. Because grief cannot arise when that is a perception. So that's the perception of wise people, and therefore grief does not arise in them. Well, at least let us touch the next verse. So basically, Shankaracharya explained that Bhishma, Drona or anybody does not deserve to be grieved for because they are immortal. Atma is immortal. Therefore it does not die. Arjuna, your grief is on account of death of Bhishma or Drona. But what do you mean by Bhishma and Drona? In reality, both of them are Atma or self or consciousness. That's what they are. So when the Upanishad says you, when the teacher says you, where does that you ultimately stop? Or where does it go? How far does it reach? Doesn't stop at the body, doesn't stop at the mind, doesn't stop at the intellect. It means you truly are, which is a self or consciousness. That's what this is all changing stuff. Is it not so? How many times we have gone through the business of birth and death? So those of us who believe in the past birth and future birth, we know that, and Gita will say, countless births happen. So this is a costume. And Lord Krishna will explain, just as a person gives up the worn out garments and takes up the new garment, so also the self gives up the worn out body and takes up the new one. A garment doesn't deserve to be grieved for. If you know it as garment. Because Arjuna takes it to be self, that's what he's grieving for it. But it's garment. Then what about the one who wearing the garment? Oh, that never dies. He's immortal. Self is nitya or immortal. So, then the question is, tatra kathamiva nitya iti. How do you explain that Atma is immortal? So Lord Krishna says, the next verse, let us read that. Natvevaham jatu nasam natvam neme janadhipaha nachaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayamatah param. Look at the translation, because Sanskrit we don't understand, so look at the translation. Natu eva aham jatuna asam. There was never a time that I did not exist. Lord Krishna says, in English, there never was a time that I did not exist. Na means no, not. Aham means I. Na jatu means never. Na asam, I was not. In two negatives are there. There never was a time when I was not, remember. You know what Lord Krishna says? There never was a time when I was not. So when these two negatives means what? There never was a time when I was not means what? I always was, isn't it? There never was a time when I was not means I always was. Then why don't you say straight? Why do you talk in this manner? Why? Lord Krishna should have simply said, I always was. Why does Lord Krishna says there never was a time when I was not? Because you think that I was not, you see. You think that as Krishna I was born on such and such date and before that I did not exist. No, Lord Krishna, we know that you always were. I'm talking about myself. Arjuna may say, oh, you are God. And so you always were. No big deal. It's understandable that you always were. But what about me? I know that I did not exist before my birth. So then Lord Krishna says further, Natvam, nor you, means what? There never was a time when you were not. There never was a time when you were not. Now this is something to be deliberated upon. So Lord Krishna has one perception of ourselves and we have a different perception about ourselves. What is our perception of ourselves? That I did not exist before my birth. Everybody knows that. Every year we celebrate the birthday. For whatever reason. This is very clear. That alone is called birth. What is birth? Birth is coming into existence of what previously did not exist. What is birth? Coming into existence of that which did not exist before. So when you say a pot is made at a given time, that means that before that time the pot did not exist. That's called birth. So that's how doctor can say, what's the birth time? 10 a.m., 10 minutes, 53 seconds, or whatever. Meaning that before the time this child was not. I don't know how they decide the time. When the head comes out, leg comes out, body, what comes out, that they must know. Anyway, that controversy is not at all, It's what do you mean by, when he is born? When the first thing comes out, is it the birth? I don't know, you would know better. Or when the whole child comes out, is it the birth? Whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. I think the astrologers may matter. For astrology, every second is important, I don't know how long does it take for the child to really come out of the womb of the mother, but it takes a few minutes. That would matter to astrology because the thing may change. They go to a star, a nakshatra, and then divide into so many fractions, and then they decide. Anyway, so let us say whatever the time, the birth time. That means that before that moment, the child did not exist, then alone it is called birth. Is it not so? So birth means, now in technical terms, the state when the child did not exist is non-existence of the child, right? When one thing does not exist, called what? Non-existence of that thing. When the pot was not made, the pot did not exist. That's called the state of non-existence of pot. That's simple enough, right? Now, there are two kinds of non-existence. This pot did not exist before its creation, and pot will not exist after its destruction also. Isn't it? So, non-existence before creation and non-existence after destruction, right? So, our logicians, Nayayikas, they differentiate between these two kinds of non-existence. One is called prior non-existence. What is prior? Non-existence before birth. What is called posterior non-existence? Means what? Non-existence after that. Right? So that we know prior non-existence and posterior non-existence. In Sanskrit, pragabhava and pradvamsabhava. But prior non-existence, posterior non-existence. So when Lord Krishna says, there never was a time when I was not, Lord Krishna is denying non-existence. What kind of non-existence is Lord Krishna denying? There never was a time when you were not. So about him, about you, about us, what kind of non-existence is denied? The prior non-existence. Don't worry about that, but I thought I'll just make you familiar with some technical term, that's all right. Not to confuse you. But the thing is, because there are two, because second non-existence will come just now, that is why. So Lord Krishna says there is no prior, so you don't have prior non-existence, meaning that there was never the time that you were not, meaning the prior non-existence was not there. That's what Lord Krishna wants to say. Because the end of prior non-existence is the birth of the thing. One more step. This part did not exist before its creation, so that is called the prior non-existence of the part, right? What is birth? When the prior non-existence comes to an end, that is called the birth of the part. You follow? Part did not exist, that state was called prior non-existence. When the part now comes to existence, then non-existence is gone. So the end of prior non-existence is a birth. Now, end of prior non-existence can be provided there is prior non-existence to begin with. Something can end provided it is there. Lord Krishna says there is no prior non-existence for I or for you or for anybody. Therefore, there cannot be end of prior non-existence because prior non-existence was never there. Therefore, there cannot be end of prior non-existence. Therefore, there cannot be birth. Technical language, but anyway, simply means that there never was a time when you were not. Meaning that you always were, meaning that you are not born, because birth is what? Coming into existence of what did not exist. But you always existed, therefore you did not come into birth. Now this is absolutely contradictory to what everybody knows, doesn't it? I was born. What do you mean I was not born? So what is my perception? I was born. What is Lord Krishna's perception? You are not born. Now if some Tom, Dick and Harry said, you will dismiss him. But we can't dismiss Lord Krishna, understand? When he says you are not born, you take it seriously. So therefore, who says this is important? So it is not only a teacher who says, but teacher, none other than Lord Krishna says that. The scriptures say that. So one who has revealed the scripture, he says that there never was a time when you were not, meaning you always existed, meaning that you were not born. There is no birth of you. Now we know that there is birth of us. Both are right. We cannot say that we are wrong because we see birth happening every day. Means something is born, even when something is born, something is not born. Even when something is born, something is not born. So what do we see? We see the birth of a body. You automatically call it birth of Atma, but Lord Krishna says that when Lord Krishna says there is no birth, he means that Atma, you the Atma was not born. When I say I was born, it means that I, the body, was born. When Lord Krishna says you were not born, you, the Atma, was not born. There are two different standpoints, two different perceptions. So, what happens is, both are right. As long as I say that I, the body, was born, I am right. When I say I was born, then that's a problem. Because I means Atma, the self. No, that self is not born. When I say body was born, I am right. If I say Atma was born, I am not right. Body is born. Even when body is born, the self is not born. Taking the example of this part. The pot is born, meaning pot is created. And pot will be broken also, meaning pot will be destroyed also. So what was this pot before it was created? Did the pot did not exist as a pot, but pot existed as something else. As clay, isn't it? The pot did not exist as a pot, but pot existed as a clay, because if clay was not there, there is no way that a pot can be made. So somebody says a pot is born. Something is born. Somebody says something is not born. Pot is born, but clay is not born. Because what is birth? Coming into existence of what did not exist. The pot, the name and form, did not exist. That came into existence, so we say pot is born. But the clay existed, and so clay is not born. So what is its object? Is it pot or clay? I know, answer is quick. Is it pot or clay? Yes, standpoints. But then both are right. Then if both two things cannot be right, or if they are right, they cannot be equally right. pot is right and clay is right, then something is more right than the other. Something is more right than the other. This is pot is right. This is clay is right. What is more right and what is less right? More right is that which is abiding, sustaining. Less right is that which is there now and which may not be later or which was not there before. So this is pot all right, no doubt about that. But then it did not exist as pot before. It will not exist as pot after destruction. So it is there, coming and going. It has only a fleeting existence. It is perishable. So therefore, that this is pot is only temporarily so, that it is clay is always so. Isn't it? This object is clay always applies. That is pot applies only temporarily in certain conditions. Is pot is conditional truth. That is clay is unconditional truth. So we do not know the difference in conditional, and therefore what is conditional truth is taken unconditional. This body is conditional truth. Atma, unconditional truth. So we take ourselves to a body and then we say we were born and we will die. But Lord Krishna sees body as conditional, coming and going. But what is really there, like clay, is consciousness, which does not change, which is not created, which is not destroyed. From the standpoint of clay, there is no birth and no death. Similarly, from the standpoint of Atma consciousness, there is no birth, there is no death. It's up to you now to identify with what? Should I identify with something that is conditional, transitory, perishable, or should I identify with something that is permanent? If I identify with transitory, there is going to be always appointment and disappointments. If I identify with that which is permanent, no appointment, no disappointment. That's what Lord Krishna is teaching. What Arjuna should be identified with. When Lord Krishna says, there never was a time when you were not, means there is something in you that always is. There is something in you that comes and goes. There is something in you that always is. Like an actor that now puts on the costume of a king and then comes out with another costume as a beggar, then comes out in a third costume as a minister, then comes out in a fourth costume as a villain. In that actor, there is something that is conditional, incidental, and something that is essential. The actor is essential, permanent, the reality. The beggar is there, is a conditional reality, temporary reality, inconsequential reality. That this person is an actor is the reality. That the person is a beggar is an inconsequential reality, a subjective or a relative reality. In Vedanta it is called mithya, actor is called Satyam. So we are a union of Satyam and mithya. Unfortunately, actor always puts on a costume. Satyam puts on the costume of mithya to come on the stage. So also the Atma, the Satyam, has to put on a costume which is mithya to come on the stage of the world. But not recognizing the difference between the two, what is perceptible is only mithya. That alone we take as Satyam or real, and therefore all these problems arise. And therefore, what we call viveka or discrimination between Satyam and mithya, permanent and impermanent, essential and incidental, Atma and Anatma, consciousness and matter, actor and the costume. Okay, we'll continue. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. So after lunch at 1:15, we'll have satsang question and answer here. So come down.